This next keynote is something very special. Experiments are what makes us grow in startups, in anything that we're trying to accomplish. And this next talk is about an experiment in the world of accelerators. We have the established models, such as Y Combinator or Techstars, and then there are people who actually dare to do more. HackFWD was one of these experiments. It's something that we can all learn from a great deal, and David Bizer, Chief Talent Geek at HackFWD and now partner at Talent Fountain, is here to tell us all about it, so let's give him a big applause.
Thank you. Good morning. Wow, big crowd. You're there too. That makes me happy. So, you've been sitting here for about an hour, and I had the honor to be on this stage last year on the day of my birthday. So if you were here, I remember everybody standing up and singing me happy birthday. Obviously, I can't do that again because it's not my birthday. Shame, shame. But I think you should stand up because you've been sitting down for an hour, and that's got to be uncomfortable. So can everybody stand up? We're going to play a very quick game. And you know what? In the meantime, I don't have a clicker, so I don't know how to do my presentation. Okay, if you did not go to the party last night, sit down. Thank you. Okay, yeah, sorry. All right, I have to stay over here. Okay, so look at the people sitting down and say, shame on you. Stay there tonight, okay? We're counting on you. Big party tonight. Okay, now, if you left the party before midnight, sit down. Shame, shame, shame. Okay, if you left the party before 1, sit down. 2. 3. Okay, look at the people who are still standing. Superstars. And then, of course, there's the people who aren't here. And we don't know what happened to them. So, anyway, thanks, Bogdan and the How to Web team for asking me to come here and tell the story about HackFWD. HackFWD, for me, was definitely one of the most amazing 3-year experiences that I've had the opportunity to have in my life, and I've worked for some really, really interesting companies. Long, long time ago, before some of you were born, I worked for Netscape, if you remember that company. And I spent 7 years at Google as the first recruiter in the company, and then running all of the staffing for Google in Europe. But HackFWD was an amazing journey. And so Bogdan asked me if I would come here and talk about the lessons that we learned at HackFWD. And, well, many of you probably have heard about HackFWD. Many of you have met some of the people involved, know that Lars Hinrichs was the founder and CEO of HackFWD. And Lars wrote a very well-written, in-depth post on what we did and what we learned. And if you haven't read that yet, I just wanted to give you the information. And you can find that post there. And that's all I have to say, so thanks very much. No, I'm kidding. So let me tell you a little bit about the beginning of HackFWD. Okay? Lars, if you don't know, was the founder of a company called Zing, which, if you don't know that, is a little bit like LinkedIn. And he founded that company and exited. Berta Digital acquired his shares for somewhere around 50 million euros, dollars. At that point, you really don't care if it's euros or dollars. It's a lot. And Lars took a trip with his family around the world, and during that time thought about, what do I want to do? And he came up with a number of ideas. And at the end of it, and after talking to a lot of people and getting a lot of feedback, he said, I want to help so-called geeks have the opportunity and potential to build really cool shit, in an essence. Thinking that startup activity at this point in 2009 was still relatively nascent in Europe, and certainly amongst engineers. Because if you looked at what was operating at the time, you had Seed Camp and Springboard. That was pretty much it. The models were pretty much bring in, a business guy, maybe a developer. But we felt that there were so many brilliant engineers that had no opportunity to get involved in the startup scene and really build something. And as we all know, it's the engineers that are going to build the product. The business guy can't build the product. It's just a fact. And so we said, we want to build something and structure something around engineers where we can bring them into a program and allow them from pretty much nothing to build up a product that they've built a vision around and support them on the business side. And as Lars would say, geeks are the artists of the 21st century. And so that's really what we look to do. And we look to create a program that would support it. And HackFWD was structured quite a bit differently than many of the other programs at the time and certainly today. And some of those key features were, one, we invested a significant amount of capital into these companies compared to other accelerators at the time. So we were investing between about 100 and 200,000 euros into a company with 1 to 3 people that had pretty much nothing more than a prototype. And in some cases, not even. So that's a significant investment. And some people looked at HackFWD and said, hey, but you guys are taking way too much equity, because we took 27% of the company. And when you think about it, and I still believe strongly today, when you have nothing, right, or close to nothing, and somebody gives you 100 or 200 grand, that's a pretty serious commitment, and it's a pretty big risk. So we felt comfortable taking that amount, considering the support that we planned on providing them. We also built a program that lasted 12 months, which was longer than any other program at the time, and built a curriculum for those startups to go through, consisting of course, mentoring and events that we would put together. We also let startups stay in their own locales instead of bringing them together, which was another big bet that we could do this virtually. And we made everything open and transparent so that people would know what they were getting into. And still today on the website, if you see in the top right corner, it says back to original homepage, you can still see those documents, and they're still there, and there's still some tools that actually are valuable to startups today and tomorrow. So we centered it around geeks, and we focused very, very heavily on the community and who we brought in to participate in HackFWD. So we didn't call them mentors. Most of them, all of them, were mentors, but we called them referrers because it was the way that we devised to attract and actually scout startups from across the region. So we brought in people with all kinds of different functional expertise from almost all of the countries in Europe who could help identify up-and-coming startups or up-and-coming engineers in their local areas, but also contribute in some meaningful way based on the expertise that they brought to the community. And above all, well, certainly because it was my responsibility to build that community, so I'm a little bit biased, but I'm really, really proud of having built that community because that's what made HackFWD, and actually that community still lives today and is quite powerful in a sense of not only supporting the startups, most of which are still active, but also each other, and it's built one hell of a network. And people talk, and we had a panel yesterday about networks and how that's one of the most important things about startup accelerators. And I believe that really deeply, and I think everybody says it. You know, it's part of the pitch of an accelerator. But my advice to you as startups is really look at the networks that have been built and established behind the program that you're in and see for yourself, will I be able to get out of this what I need to help support my startup? So we built this community of geeks, and we kicked it off with events, and the first event and several following we held in Mallorca, which was also a bit different as well. We brought everyone to Mallorca for 3 days. Initially, the idea was we would take people somewhere remote where they could focus just on the startup and just on feedback and really concentrate on how to move their startup forward. Now, we learned after a few times in Mallorca that bringing people geeks or non-geeks to an idyllic paradise-like location that's warm, sunny, and has beach is not necessarily the best idea because it can be rather distracting. So we have really nice photos and we had a really good time, but soon we moved those events to Berlin, which is still a great place, but less distracting. It feels more serious. And this is one of the things that I want to talk about later is, what we learned and what I would advise to others going forward in terms of this need for some seriousness, this need for some professionalism and structure around moving startups forward. So we focused a lot on content and value within that content. So we spent a lot of time figuring out who to bring to our startups, who to bring to our events that could really guide them in the areas where they needed the most guidance. There's a lot of attention paid to that kind of matching, and we filmed everything. And this website still exists today, passionmeetsmomentum.com, where there's a massive amount of content for anybody to go and seek out. And you can think about any issue almost that you're facing in your startup, and there's probably somebody with a lot of expertise giving a talk on that site. And that's one of the things that we did that we're really proud of, building that out and being able to offer that to the community. We invested in 16 startups. Some of the logos are on the screen. 13 of those startups that we invested in are still active today. So while HackFWD is closed for business in a sense, it's closed for new business, there's still quite a number of startups that actually have some decent potential. I won't make predictions, but I would say that there's a good half dozen amongst the ones you see on this screen that do have the potential to move forward and see a potential exit someday. But this is one of the reasons, and I guess I'd rather leave it to the questions if you want to ask, well, why exactly did you shut it down, other than going and reading Lars's post, which I advise. But it was a different type of organization, and what you really want to keep in mind is that HackFWD was never a fund, right? And this is the big difference in terms of management, structure, organization, and decision making, is that HackFWD was Lars. In a financial sense, right? So if it's your wallet and you're spending the money and he spent about 8 million euros on it, at some point, maybe you decide, well, do I want to keep spending money on this? Or do I want to keep spending money on something else? And that's part of the decision-making process that Lars went through. And that's much different than how a fund would operate. So I see the time going away very quickly, so I'm going to try to speed this up a little bit. Doing an accelerator like we did, or doing a startup, is a huge risk, right? You've all seen these kinds of quotes in terms of the potential success rate, right? Look at the third piece of it, the veteran, VC-backed, IPO'd entrepreneur, failure rate 70% on the next try. That's still hugely significant. Right? So think about the first timers with the failure rate of 90%, and this is huge risk we're talking about. One of my favorite quotes is from Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, who talks about a startup being like assembling a plane after you've jumped off a cliff with the parts. And that, to me, is a great visualization of what a startup is. There's so much going on, and it's so difficult. And you're trying to move so fast to make sure everything fits together because it's a race. It's a constant race. And during that time where you're trying to do all these things, you also have to make lots and lots of decisions, and some of those decisions are going to send you off in a good way and some in another way. So, did we fail? I don't think so. I don't think we failed. I think a decision was made to stop doing something and move on to do something else. I'm pretty confident that the companies that we invested in will provide a return that will, at a very minimum, equal the investment, and probably a couple of times more. but it wasn't going in the direction where you were looking at a minimum of 5x or 10x type returns that a typical fund might look at, and it was moving slower than we were happy with. Okay, so with that, I wanted to talk to you about 3 things that I think we could do better or could have done better. Okay, so the first thing is about people, and I'm not going to read you this quote. You can read it by yourself or not, but it's basically a very famous and prominent business writer, Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great or something like that, but in essence saying that nothing else matters but the people, okay? And this is really, really a tricky thing, right? I've spent my life doing people business, right? And so people ask me all the time, how do you know, how do you know, how do you know, right? Well, I'm just a magical wizard and I know. But no, I don't. I mean, you're never 100% sure. I can't give you the secret recipe to picking the best founders. It would be cool if I could. Well, then if I could, I wouldn't give it to you. But the thing that you have to think about is you're looking for very, very particular people, and I think even with the emphasis that we put on that, and we put a huge emphasis on it because it's all we had. We had founders without really a product. So what could we look at but the people? But I think we could have done even better in terms of thinking about exactly what's going to make a great startup founder. And the thing is that today, you see a lot of this. And I don't know if you want to admit it or not, but I think we've created a massive amount of hype around startups, which is a good thing because you need that to build an ecosystem. But a side effect of doing that is you've created a bunch of startup founders that are in it for only the fun, or glamour if they think this is glamorous. And you see that. And yesterday, in the mentoring sessions, we talked as mentors to many different startups, and I'm sure towards the end of the mentoring sessions, we were all getting tired, and when I get tired, I get grumpy and mean. Somebody said to me, or I said, are you working on this thing full time? And the guy said, no. And I said, well, what else are you working on? And I expected him to tell me he was in a job, right? Because he needed money to keep living and whatever, and I don't agree with that either. But he said, well, I've got some other projects. Okay? Fine. This is possible, right? But I will, bet a lot of money that Jack Dorsey or Elon Musk is not in this room. Okay? Maybe. Okay? Prove me wrong. I'd love to see it. But you've got to focus on the startup and nothing else 24/7, right? And I'm worried about this, when what I really want is this, right? I want somebody who wants to climb Everest. I want somebody who wants to climb Everest without oxygen, right? And prove that it can be done, and spends their days and their nights dreaming about it and planning it, focused on it as this ultimate goal. And I think there are ways to extract that kind of understanding of an individual. I think that you can identify passion in people, but you have to be focused about doing it and really try to ask people questions about why they're doing something. Why is it? Because the simple question of why are you doing this can elicit a very passionate response from a very passionate person. And just asking that question, you'll see the differences in people. The people who are dreaming about it night and day have an amazing story to tell. And it's not a bullshit story, it's a real story, because they've been thinking about it so much. So people is huge. Like Robin's photo for the community of ants, I was trying to find something to define clusterfuck, which is one of my favorite words in English. And I couldn't really find an image, so I just found the word. Another thing that I saw a lot of, and I still do today, and not just with startups in the startup sense of super early stage, but startups with 20 people, 30 people, 40 people, inside those companies, it's a fucking mess, okay? In terms of process and communication. Let me tell you something. If you think your employees know where you're headed, you're probably wrong, okay? Ask me to ask them. I guarantee you most of them will say, not really sure. Because you think that you communicate, but you don't, okay? Because you have to communicate and communicate and communicate and communicate. And you don't like doing that because it requires, 1, talking to people, 2, having meetings, 3, thinking about what to communicate. But you need the people in your company to understand where the hell you're going. And it's so critical to have everybody on the same page because you have finite resources. And so you want them all to be working 100% on where you want to go and not where they think they should go. And the reason I bring this up is that I've had the chance to work for a couple of companies that were financed by Kleiner Perkins. If you know Kleiner Perkins, they've done some amazing investments. So besides Netscape, Google, Amazon, and so on and so forth. And Kleiner, in both the companies that I worked for, instigated from very, very early days a process called OKRs, which is objectives and key results. You can call them KPIs, you can call it whatever you want. But it was a very particular process that still lives on at these companies today about managing performance and communication and setting goals, vision, objectives at companies. And they were very, very, very serious about it. And it bothers me a bit to see startups not focused on that. It bothers me to talk to startups and say, when do you have a team meeting? Well, whenever we get around to it, or once a quarter. Why don't you have a team meeting every week? When do you meet one-to-one with the people that are working for you? It needs to be every week. And I know people hate meetings. So you have to design the meetings so that they have an impact. But meetings of this type with your team, with your employees, are the best way to push them forward. I talked yesterday again on the panel about pressure. I think there's a lack of pressure, and I think that's one of the #1 faults of ours at HackFWD, was that we didn't put enough pressure on these guys. We were too nice. And I'm not saying that you need to be mean. Butcher's probably not here. He's mean, right? But, think about it. Those guys that pitched to him yesterday, he was rough, but that's what they need, okay? There was a I don't remember the name of it, but there was a company on stage, and they said, he said to them, the startup said, do you think we can succeed? And he said, absolutely not, okay? Now, the guy probably shrinked off the stage and maybe cried. I probably would have, right? But what you've got to be able to do is say, why did he say that to me? Right? Why? Does he have a point? Is it complete bullshit? But you need to think about stuff, and you need that kind of a push. Actually, I should have changed the slide. So this is Mike Butcher. Punch him in the face and then go have an ice cream. You want that. You want somebody to be punching you in the face. Not literally. But, and this is where I think we fell down. We fell down in putting structure into some of these startups and saying, 1, you've got to have this kind of cyclical meeting type of situation where you think about things in the longer term, in the medium term, in the short term, and you talk to people and you communicate and you set objectives and you figure out how you're going to get there, that you communicate to people that can support you. I think it's phenomenal. I tried very, very hard to put into place a system requiring some amount of reporting, and it was like pulling teeth, right? We talk about mentorship a lot at accelerator programs, and I have lots and lots of views on that. But the thing is that you bring in these great experts, and then the startups don't take advantage of that. There's no preparation involved, right? And so I worked very, very hard to try to get the startups to prepare for the mentorship meetings. Right? And they were always bitching that the mentors weren't prepared. Of course the mentors aren't prepared. They're super busy. They don't have time to go to your website, read your pitch, right? It's cool that they're there. You prepare. You figure out who the mentors are. You ask them tons of questions and say, be really critical. I need that feedback so I can understand and reflect. So I'm running out of time, and I really wanted to leave a bit for questions. So to me, there's so much to say. It was 3 years. It was intense. And we had an awesome time, and I think that we're still going to see a lot of value come out of what we did. But if you think about a few of the things that I tried to leave you with today, really focus on the people, and don't forget about the process, because you need some structure about what you're doing. It's not all fun and games. You need to make that happen. I'll be around for the rest of the day if there's not a lot of time for questions, and happy to chat more about it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, David. That was very inspiring. Are there any questions for David? Maybe have a mic like here up front.
Hello, my name is Ciprian. Hi, David. You said you also did the recruiting for Google, or yeah. So, what was the difference? What's the difference between recruiting for Google and recruiting for a startup? Why do you think it would be different?
The major difference is that if I call somebody, I say I'm from Google, they'll talk to me. I'm serious. I mean, it's a huge, huge, huge advantage, because the difficulty that a startup has is getting that first piece of engagement. I do a lot of recruitment for startups, and it's that first contact that you make that you need the person to respond to. And this is where most things fall down, because the person doesn't know anything about you, you don't say anything convincing, et cetera, et cetera. So the startup has a lot more pressure on them, a lot more responsibility to build this story so that when you make first contact with an individual, whether it's face-to-face or via your website or on the telephone, email, whatever, immediately you get them hooked or interested or excited or something that makes them want to talk to you. That's the most important thing in my mind.
But what about from perspective of the kind of qualities or personalities?
So at Google we recruited primarily people who were smart, or that we thought were smart, and we focused more on the intelligence than we did on the experience, because we thought 12 months from now, whatever they're doing, they're not going to be doing. They're going to be doing something else. So we need somebody intelligent enough to adapt. At a startup in the very, very early stages, most of the time you want somebody that has the perfect experience or near perfect experience. Depends on the function, right? But if you need a sales guy and you're developing a SaaS piece of software, you want a guy who's sold SaaS software, right? Because you don't want ramp-up time on those guys. So there's a place for expertise and there's a place for intelligence. If you can get both, it's perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Next question. It's on.
You said that you had a lot of views on mentoring and the way you structure mentoring sessions.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of mentoring sessions because I've been a mentor at different accelerators, and I've seen how they work. And I think they're some of the most frustrating things for startups and mentors, and can be some of the most valuable things. It's really, really hard to do it. So I don't know if Kirsten's here from Seed Camp, but Seed Camp does a really good job of bringing in amazing people. In fact, I don't know if it's polite to say this, but I think a lot of mentors go to Seed Camp events because it's great networking amongst the mentors. And that's fine. I mean, that's one of the reasons they get so many people there, and that's good. The difficulty is that you're rotating through mentors at Seed Camp or Startup Boot Camp or whatever without most of the time having a better understanding of what you can get out of them. Because like I said, they're not prepared to talk to you in most cases. In most cases, they haven't researched what you've done. And I can count the number of times on my hand where I've sat down in a mentoring session and somebody had looked up what I've done and asked me relevant questions. And this is what really bothers me about mentoring. The accelerators have a responsibility to try to do great matching because it's going to add more value, but it's extremely difficult. I mean, look at what you're doing here last night. You can't do it. There's too many people. You can't say, oh, he's better for this one and she's better for this one. It's a mind fuck. But you as startups want to take the responsibility to get the most out of a mentoring session and coming prepared. And if you can't prepare for the person, if it's a surprise, then at least have this list of questions. I mean, we were doing that last night. What are your questions? What do you want to get out of that? But the more prepared and the more focused you can be, that's how you're going to get value. And most importantly, you need to understand how to distill feedback, because you're going to get so much feedback. It's going to be so overwhelming. And you can't take it all as valid, right? Okay, we all have expertise, we all have a lot to say, but some of what we say is not going to be appropriate to you. Some of what we say might be pure bullshit. You need to figure that out. And I've seen a startup struggle enormously with this because they were in mentoring over many months with different people telling them, go B2B, go B2C, go B2B, go B2C, and they couldn't figure it out. And they stayed on both paths for way, way, way too long because they were getting conflicting views and never took the time to really distill the feedback and say, what makes sense for us?
Very cool. One last question over here.
Hello, I'm Radu from One Communication. You said you let the startups stay in their own locale.
Yeah.
Was that a good decision, and why?
Yes and no. Yes and no. So I think it could have worked better if we put more structure and pressure on it, right? But there were 3-month gaps between the time mostly that we saw the startups. So we brought them to events quarterly. And so I think left to their own devices, and some of these startups were in places with very, very small ecosystems. So I think that's dangerous. But, this is one of the great challenges of Europe. How do you allow people to start companies wherever they are and give them the support? And it's very, very hard to do, as evidenced by what we've tried. And that's why you see most programs are, focused on one location. But there are people that don't want to move for many, 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 many reasons. And I think that's okay to try to build something where you are. And then as it progresses, make decisions about what you need to do. But it's difficult. It's really difficult.
Okay. Thank you so much,
Thanks.
David.
Thank you.